Happy Thursday, everybody, and welcome to the latest episode of Dear Mr. Fantasy. This week, folks, for my first ever guest, I brought on the one, the only, the Mr. Pat Fitzmaurice from FantasyPros. Pat, how are you doing this morning, man? Well, I guess it's afternoon now if you're out east there.
I'm not. I'm in the Midwest, so still morning, Nate, but I'm doing well. Thank you for having me. I'm honored to be the first guest on this show, and yeah, man, whether it's on a podcast or closing down a dive bar in Canton, Ohio, you are one of my favorite guys to hang out with in the fantasy industry.
I appreciate that, man. That was a fun night. Probably shouldn't talk about it too much here, but if you haven't been to the Fantasy Football Expo, folks, whether you're an analyst or a fan, it is a fantastic time in Canton. Bob Lung does an incredible job of putting on a phenomenal football weekend. It's an absolute blast. I think I will be there this year for sure. Hopefully you're going to be there, Pat.
Yes, sir. I will be back. Yeah, Bob does an amazing job.
He really does. All right, folks, well, let's get into it. We just had some wild signings. We've had some moving parts and pieces. Obviously, Aaron Rodgers wants to be a Jet now, which is about the last thing I think anyone wants to talk about. We've just been oversaturated with it. However, I did get to watch a highlight film of his 10 best plays on Good Morning Football this morning, right before I came up into the studio. And I've got to say, he might be annoying, but his career, he has been incredible since he actually got the starting nod in Green Bay. Do you think he can replicate that in New York? Do you think we can get like a little bit of a Aaron Rodgers resurgence with the Jets with these offensive weapons he has, Pat?
Yeah, I mean, as a Packers fan, Nate, I can attest to some of those wild plays that he made in Green Bay. I mean, this dude's got arm talent, maybe the most talented thrower of a football to have ever played the game. I think he can replicate his success, maybe more so in real life football than in terms of fantasy value. He always, when he and Nathaniel Hackett were paired together in Green Bay from 2019 to 2021, he played like the Packers offense moved at a really slow pace. And plus the Jets are going to have a top 5 defense. So they're not going to be involved in a lot of shootouts. I think it's going to be more of an efficient season than a season where Rodgers is putting up like eye-popping numbers. So maybe not a lot of 300, 350-yard games, but he can be effective and, get us where we want to go with Garrett Wilson, Breece Hall, and some of those sexy skill players for the Jets.
Well, if he's going to be efficient, I'm going to take him in Scott Fishbowl then, because that's what you want out of a quarterback, and Scott Fishbowl is efficiency. One of the hardest leagues to play in. Now, let's get into some questions. We have got some great ones from some listeners. The first one we're going to hit is, what was your favorite move in free agency so far?
Oh, man, nothing really got the heart rate pounding too much, Nate, but from a personal perspective, I was pretty excited about the Rashad Penny signing in Philadelphia. And I mean, this is a guy going into free agency who was a very distressed fantasy asset, oft injured veteran, has yet another season end early due to injury. There weren't too many landing spots that could have gotten me excited about Penny, or at least reasonably enthusiastic about Penny's value for 2023. Philadelphia was definitely one, though, going to, terrific offense, run heavy offense, one of the best offensive lines in the league. And I know they're not done adding. Rashad Penny and Kenneth Gainwell isn't going to be enough, especially with Penny's injury history. They're going to draft at least one guy, maybe sign another guy. But man, it's like a committee back in that offense. I think Penny still has value. And I've got him in a best ball dynasty league where I've been so close to a title the last 3 years, Nate. I'm trying to keep that window pried open. And, I thought I might wind up dropping Penny for one of my rookie draft picks this year, but I think I'm going to keep him around now.
It's interesting you say that because I completely agree with you. And I know that there are people that say, well, Rashad Penny, he can't stay on the field. He's not going to be a lead back in this offense. They've got Kenny Gainwell. We've heard talks that they might go after Bijan at 10, or they might go after a running back at the back end of the first round. But I agree with you. I still think that there's value for Penny because if they can lessen his workload, maybe he's able to play through a full season and we actually get some decent production out of the guy because we know when he's on the field, he's electric.
Yeah, that would be nice. Bijan is still the one thing. I mean, that could torpedo Penny's value completely. Like if the Eagles get Bijan, and granted that would be a pretty exciting spot for Bijan. People would be fired up about that, but Penny investors would not be too fired up about that.
Okay, so to piggyback on that, if Bijan ends up in Philly, is he an RB1? Is he in that RB1 tier, do you think, in 2023?
Oh, man, Nate, I think he's an RB1 no matter where he goes. Unconditionally. I think he's going to be a workhorse and he's going to be fantastic. One of the best, RB prospects to enter since Saquon Barkley, right up there, better than Jonathan Taylor as a prospect even. And, I'm a pro Taylor guy. So yeah, he's an RB1.
I love it. All right. So our next question we've got, with the trade of DJ Moore to the Bears, do you think that this ups his fantasy value in 2023 and beyond?
Man, I kind of think not. Like, I don't think it's going to be a major haircut in fantasy value, but I think it's going to be about the same, if not down a little. We're just talking about a team that was the run heaviest team in the NFL last year. And I know the Bears were sort of forced to play that way because they were so depleted at wide receiver after Darnell Mooney got hurt. Their offensive line was one of the worst in the league. I think they're going to play a little bit differently this year, but they're still going to be really run heavy. I think Justin Fields' highest passing yardage total was 258 last year, and second highest was 204. And I don't think he threw more than 28 passes in any game last year. So you're talking about a really run heavy approach here. Hopefully DJ Moore will continue to be really efficient, but I think the dreams of 100 catch season are probably far fetched.
Yeah, and I have to agree with you. Wide receiver 2, back in wide receiver 2, flex play for most of the season, more than likely.
Yes. Yeah. That's kind of what I'm thinking. Running back or wide receiver 22, 23, 24. That's probably where I'll have him in my rankings when the dust of free agency settles.
That's fair enough. All right. So we've got some questions in the chat from Aaron Stewart. Which Philly running back do we want in fantasy? Penny, Gainwell, to be determined rookie running back.
Oh, man. As of now, I'll say Penny, but, it could be the TBD rookie, obviously, if it's Bijan, probably if it's Gibbs, or, I've got some other favorites in this class, Devon Achane. I think Kendre Miller would be an interesting fit there. So we'll see. As of now, I think it's Penny just because he's been really efficient when he has been healthy, but, we just need the health to cooperate.
Absolutely. All right, so let's get back to some submitted questions here. This is kind of playing off of that Chicago Bears question. Is there any fantasy value for Mooney, Claypool, and Kmet with the acquisition of Moore, or is he just going to kind of suck targets away from them, and it's going to be kind of like the Kansas City situation with wide receivers last year, where it was week to week, we don't know who's going to be relevant?
Yeah, it could be kind of the week-to-week thing. I mean, I think Mooney and Claypool could have splash weeks potentially for best ball, weeks where they score touchdowns or whatever. But for the most part, in managed leagues, I don't know how often you're going to be starting those guys in such a run-heavy offense that now has a clear lead receiver in DJ Moore. I think Kmet, his value probably took a little hit too with Moore's arrival. He was kind of a borderline TE1, TE2, and now I think he's basically high end TE2.
That makes me sad, Pat, but you're right.
I
know part of the Cole Kmet Club when he came out as a rookie was a big fan. It's unfortunate that this talent probably isn't going to be as fantasy relevant as it was last season. And if you're a dynasty manager with any of these guys, are you looking to move them at this point for anything you can get for them, especially Kmet and Mooney?
Yeah, I mean, I would probably be interested in at least testing the waters on those guys. Kmet, if you have to hold on to Kmet, it's not the worst thing in the world. Maybe the situation just kind of gets better. Maybe they become more pass oriented than I'm expecting them to be. But they're probably sells. But then again, the people you're trying to sell them to probably realize their value is a bit down with the DJ Moore signing.
Is Claypool, could you even get anything for Chase Claypool at this point?
Man, a third rounder at this point. I mean, it's for a guy who there was so much enthusiasm. I mean, he's still got those incredible physical attributes, the size and speed combination, but man, things are not looking good for him. This is not a good situation for a talented young wide receiver to be in. And he's already shown some immaturity early in his career. So who knows if he ever gets to fulfill his potential.
Do you think the Bears are kicking themselves for giving up a second-round pick for him?
They should be, Nate, especially when that pick is 32 overall and could have been a really good player. And now that they've got DJ Moore, I mean, they could have just drafted someone in the 4th round to be their 3rd receiver. Yeah, I think that was not one of Ryan Pohl's better moves. I mean, he is a king here in the Chicago area right now these days after that trade he made with Carolina, Nate. But the Claypool deal will not go down as one of his better moves.
Well, Pat, do you think maybe Poles will look to move Claypool this offseason?
Yeah, I just don't know what he'd get for him at this point. I mean, he gave up a early 2nd-round pick for him, and if he tried to trade him right now, I don't know if he could get a 3rd for him.
Yeah, I'd find it unlikely that they'd get that return. So Claypool's going to be a Bear. We've got a clogged wide receiver room, receiving in general room in Chicago. So that's going to be tough to grade. Now, here's another interesting one. Darren Waller to the Giants. It's the 100th pick for Darren Waller back to Las Vegas, essentially swapping Kadarius Toney for Darren Waller. Is Darren Waller fantasy relevant? Is he a tight end 1? Is he a high end tight end 2 in New York?
I think for as long as he's healthy, he is a tight end 1, maybe not high end, maybe mid-range or toward the lower end. I guess the question is whether he can stay healthy, Nate. I think he definitely helps Daniel Jones if he's healthy, but he's missed 14 games the last 2 years. He's going to be 31 right around week 1 in September. So I have questions about how much more gas he has left in the tank. I think he's still a good player if he can stay on the field. And I do understand why the Giants did this. I mean, their wide receiver room was in such a state of disrepair. It was probably more than they could fix in a single off season, especially with kind of a lackluster wide receiver class. They just spent a boatload of money on retaining Daniel Jones and Saquon Barkley. So I don't think they could fix their wide receiver room, but this helps their pass catching problem. This gives them a viable, really quality pass catching tight end.
So do you think this gives Daniel Jones a bump?
Yeah, to some degree. I think it helps. He needed pass catchers to help raise the baseline for him with passing yardage. He's already got the rushing value, and he was at least, a much more efficient passer last year. But I do think if Waller can stay healthy, that this is going to help Jones a little bit.
Does it help Jones enough to put him in that QB1 tier?
I don't think it moves the needle that much. I mean, he was pretty close to, if he's not already, he is really close to back end QB1. So he's pretty close. I don't know if the Waller move substantially moves the needle on Jones' fantasy value, but it certainly doesn't hurt.
All right, so let's move on to our next question, Pat. Do you think Miles Sanders can finally have consistent fantasy production in Carolina with Frank Reich?
Man, it's interesting that you tie that question to Frank Reich, or your the listener viewer tied it to Frank Reich, because I've had big issues with the way Frank Reich used Jonathan Taylor in Indianapolis. It kind of drove me crazy. And I know Colts fans who were frustrated by that too. So maybe Reich is not the coach to coax consistency out of Miles Sanders, but at least he's probably got more of a chance for a featured role in Carolina than he had in Philadelphia.
Well, you're not worried about them retaining Deontay Foreman. They've got Chuba already there.
Yeah, I mean, I think even if they were to re-sign Foreman, that Sanders would still be the primary guy. And, maybe they do draft someone else. I don't think Sanders is necessarily going to be some Jonathan Taylor level workhorse. But, sure. I don't think it's a bad move for him. I think it's kind of a lateral move for fantasy. He goes to a worse team, but is probably going to get a slightly bigger workload, a few more touches than he had in Philadelphia. Maybe he gets a chance to be more of a pass catcher than he was in Philadelphia, because he, came out of college at least being regarded as a decent pass catcher. I don't think he's ever going to be a prolific pass catcher, but we'll see. Maybe it changes the usage and at least keeps his fantasy value level with where it was last year, if not maybe even a little higher.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how this Carolina offense plays out this offseason, what kind of parts and pieces they start to add. Because, right now at wide receiver, they've got Laviska Shenault and Terrace Marshall, and that's about what they have. Now getting rid of DJ Moore. So I could see that with Slime getting more of that receiving work in this offense, along with Chuba, obviously, of course. Where do you slide him? You think he's probably like a mid-level RB2?
Yeah, that sounds about right. Like somewhere around maybe RB 19, 20 off the top of my head.
I'm okay with that.
Yeah. And don't forget about the great Hayden Hearst now in Carolina.
That's right. They did
soak up those targets.
How do you feel about that? Do you think that, tight end's such a kind of wasteland for fantasy. Could Hearst put up a tight end 1 tier season in 2023 in Carolina, depending on who they roll out at quarterback, obviously?
Yeah, it's not a bad landing spot for Hearst's value. Like, I've never thought of him as like anything close to being a tight end 1, but going to this team that doesn't have much at wide receiver is going to get a pretty polished young quarterback, assuming they take either CJ Stroud or Bryce Young. There probably is potential for Hearst to put up a better fantasy season in Carolina than he did with Joe Burrow last year.
So I had this thrown out yesterday, Pat, on another show. I was on with Dave Kluge and John Helmkamp, and both of them kind of seem to think that the signing of Andy Dalton, because it's a 2-year, $11 million deal, that they're going after Anthony Richardson with that first pick. Do you think there's any merit to that? It does kind of make sense to me because he's a guy we know is probably going to have to sit for a season.
Richardson ratchets up the pressure on that front office so much, Nate, because either you take him and, then if he fails, people are wondering why you took a guy who couldn't complete 55% of his passes in his 1 year as a college starter. And, when there were like much more polished, pro-ready NFL quarterbacks available. On the flip side, if you don't take him and he turns out to be a star, people are going to be second guessing Carolina for passing on a guy who just tested like Superman at the combine. So it's possible that's their move. I wouldn't be shocked by it. I tend to think it's going to be CJ Stroud, that they're going to take the more polished guy, but I could be wrong. It's that is an interesting hint that maybe Anthony Richardson is in play for them.
Yeah, I found it interesting as well. Now, if they go after someone else, do you think it's Stroud, or do you think it's Stroud? You think they're going Stroud?
I think so, just because, like me, I guess in my right now, if I was drafting in a rookie super flex draft, Nate, I would take Stroud just because, as good as Young is, the size thing terrifies me. He is a small dude, and, I'd just rather have the bigger guy in a case where I think they're pretty close in terms of talent as passers.
So then Bryce Young falls to the Texans, where unless they decide to be crazy and go after Will Levis, I suppose that's always something that could happen. Where do you think Levis lands in this draft? Is he a top 10?
I do think he's top 10. I think all 4 of them go top 10. And, it's interesting. Like a lot of people have talked about Anthony Richardson maybe going to Seattle at number 5, since they've now got Geno under contract and could bring along Richardson slowly. But maybe that's the same with Levis, and Seattle takes him and has him watch and learn for the better part of a year or the entire year. So, but I do think all 4 of these guys are going to go top 10, Nate, just because the drop off is so steep after these dudes. Like, even if there aren't exact fits for Levis in the top 10, like, I think they're going to be teams motivated to move up and try to get him, because he definitely has an enticing profile.
Man, I wish the draft was tomorrow.
I know, man.
So ready to see it all go down, but it gives us a month to kind of talk about things. Now, I've got a chat question here, and I just saw this, I believe, this morning. Any thoughts on the Patriots signing James Robinson? It seems like a perfect best ball player, and I don't disagree, Pat. How do you feel about it?
Man, my colleague Derek Brown at Fantasy Pros loved the James Robinson signing for Ramondre Stevenson, because he thinks James Robinson is the proverbial meat shield for Stevenson. Like, they were going to add a running back, but better they add someone who's, kind of in Derek's opinion, like a shakier guy rather than some young stud in the draft or whatever. I mean, like, maybe he's going to be the primary guy, but they've also still got Pierre Strong and Kevin Harris, both of whom didn't get much action as rookies, but like look pretty good in the limited action they got. So, man, maybe he's an end gamer in best ball drafts for me. Like if I was doing one right now and it was a 20 rounder, like I don't think I'd consider taking him before like the 18th round, to be honest.
Do you have any interest in rostering him in Dynasty in a deeper format where you've got kind of a larger bench?
I already have him in Dynasty in somewhere where I have a larger bench, and I'm going to keep him around. He's on that same best ball Dynasty roster with Rashad Penny, Nate. So I guess free agency is preserving the value of some of my more marginal running backs.
Oh, you love to see it. You love to see it. So now another move that wasn't so surprising, but Baker Mayfield goes to Tampa Bay. So the question is Baker Mayfield going to beat out Kyle Trask in Tampa? And if so, is there any level of fantasy relevance to Mayfield in that offense?
Yes, I think he's going to beat out Kyle Trask. Fantasy relevance, maybe in Superflex or 2QB formats. But I'm not too optimistic about a guy who averaged 10.8 fantasy points per game last season. And granted, some of those games were with the Rams, who had lost Cooper Kupp for the season and were, trotting out some pretty marginal NFL wide receivers. And the situation wasn't totally great in Carolina either, as far as the pass catchers. But, we had talked about DJ Moore earlier, Nate. This is the one guy who couldn't jumpstart DJ Moore. Like Sam Darnold made DJ Moore into a borderline wide receiver 1. And Baker Mayfield just could not get DJ Moore going. So I've got some concerns about Baker Mayfield. I think he's just a bridge guy.
So that said, are you concerned about Mike Evans and Chris Godwin now? Because if Mayfield wins his job, the only wide receiver one he's ever had in his career was Jarvis Landry in Cleveland.
Yeah, and Landry was a slot guy, so I guess I'm less concerned about Chris Godwin. I'm very concerned about Mike Evans, and I guess I'm not alone, because I thought I saw that his underdog ADP right now is like wide receiver 37 or 38 or something like that. So that's probably what he is now. I mean, I hate to say it, the great Mike Evans is a low-end wide receiver 3.
Yeah, I saw this coming even before the Mayfield signing. I think a lot of people see it. If you look at his career versus Julio Jones' career, very, very similar career arcs. And he's hitting that age where Julio Jones started to kind of fall off. So I was out on Mike Evans before, but if Mayfield wins his job, I'm selling Mike Evans anywhere I can, anywhere that I've got him. And probably the same with Chris Godwin, because while you can probably get wide receiver 1 return for him at this point right now, but when Mayfield wins that job, I feel like his stock is just going to plummet.
Yeah. And Evans has never been a separator, really. And like, I don't know if, granted, like if you throw a ball anywhere close to Mike Evans, he's going to get it. But I don't know if you don't necessarily have to be a super tight windows thrower to complete passes to Mike Evans. But man, I would feel better about a separator who is paired with Baker Mayfield than the kind of wide receiver that Evans is.
Absolutely. God, this is all so interesting. And we're all so fresh in all this. There's just so many things we don't know at this point. It makes it all fun to talk about. Now we've got another question in the chat. Who do you like better, Ramondre or Miles Sanders?
Ramondre, definitely. I agree with Derek Brown to the extent that, like, I don't think Robinson is going to be forcing a committee with Ramondre Stevenson. Like, I think they really like Stevenson, and he's, if not a true workhorse, going to be like bordering on the cusp of workhorse usage.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I've been a Ramondre stan since before he was even drafted when he was at Oklahoma. The dude's a baller, and we know Belichick likes the committee, but I think he's going to be the Damian Harris of 2 years ago. And James Robinson's just going to I feel like he's going to be more of the relief role, the change of pace back. And he might even get supplanted by Pierre Strong, who you mentioned earlier, who when he was on the field last season, he did look good when he got opportunities. So we'll see what happens in New England. Bill Belichick's kind of a master of his trade, so I'm sure he'll figure it out. I'm sure it's a move that makes sense. All right, we've got 2 more questions here, Pat, and then we will get everyone out of here. Now, David Montgomery, he signs with Detroit. Can David Montgomery mimic that Jamal Williams production with the Lions?
I don't think he's going to mimic 17 rushing touchdowns, Nate. Like Jamal Williams couldn't have had better luck with the touchdowns as the Lions repeatedly set him up at the 1 or 2 yard line. I think 13 of his 17 touchdown runs were from 1 or 2 yards. So that's not going to repeat, but he might get more yardage than David Montgomery. And like, it's crazy how stark the rushing differential was between Jamal Williams and DeAndre Swift last year in usage. Like Jamal with over 250 carries and DeAndre Swift with under 100. And I know Swift missed a couple of games, but like not that many. I think he played 14 games and averaged 7.1 carries a game. I guess they're just not going to use DeAndre Swift as much more than a passing down running back. So I guess Montgomery is going to be their early down guy. And even though they did not throw to Jamal Williams last year, I think he had 16 targets all season. Like at least they can throw to David Montgomery if they want to. He's probably not going to be a prolific pass catcher when he's sharing a backfield with DeAndre Swift and they've got him in that role, but he can catch passes. So maybe more yardage upside than Jamal Williams. He's just probably not going to score, 17 touchdowns or 12 or maybe not even 10.
That I can't see him getting into double digits. It's just not the type of runner that David Montgomery is at all. How does this shift the needle for you on DeAndre Swift? Are you looking to move him off of your dynasty rosters at this point?
Yeah, although I think the value is definitely like people were expressing optimism about him before that Montgomery signing. And now I think like that really let some of the air out of his balloon. So still only 24 and maybe you can sell people on the idea that he's still young or whatever. But like, as long as he is confined to this role that the Lions have chosen for him, I don't see much immediate hope. He's got to go somewhere else to fulfill his potential, I think.
No, I agree. All right, so let's round it out with Derek Carr, yay or nay?
I'd say yay. I mean, like a perfectly average starting NFL quarterback. I'd put him in the Kirk Cousins basket. Like you can win if the supporting cast is good enough, and but he's not going to single-handedly uplift the team and take it to the next level. For fantasy, I just like that he's never been a QB1 for fantasy. I don't think. Maybe once he averaged he was like QB10 in fantasy points per game or something. But for the most part, he's been like a higher end QB2. I think that's what he's going to be again. But I like that he is there to help facilitate Chris Olave and maybe even Rashid Shaheed, who I kind of like as a sleeper this year.
Oh, I like that. I love Rashid Shaheed. He's very talented. Now, last question about New Orleans here. Do you think Michael Thomas is going to be relevant this season? They restructured his deal. He's back. He's the type of receiver that Derek Carr likes. Could he turn out a wide receiver 1-tier season, or are we just so far past that point in his career?
I'm just so pessimistic about his health outlook, Nate. Like I feel like I can't count on a guy who's had that many foot injuries. So I would expect that like if he's healthy, he's going to produce, as he sort of did early last season, but he just didn't last long. And I have major long-term concerns about his ability to stay on the field.
Yeah, foot injuries are no joke. If you've ever had one, you know how long it takes, because you kind of have to walk and you have to get back on it at some point, especially if you're an athlete. So I can see the concern there. I'm with you. I don't really necessarily believe Michael Thomas is going to be relevant, and I'm not trying to acquire him in any formats, and I likely won't be drafting him come August when we start hitting redraft season. So Pat, thank you so much for joining me today. I appreciate it so much. Folks, if you don't follow him on Twitter already, at @Fitz_FF, make sure you're following Fantasy Pros as well. Great work from my man, Pat, here. Thank you so much for tuning in, Pat. Pat, thanks for showing up, Pat. Thanks, everyone, for tuning in. Make sure you like and subscribe. Make sure you're following Pat on Twitter, and we will see you next week.